They never told you the truth about the Tudor court. Because if they did, you'd realize history's fairy tales were written in blood. Imagine this: you open your eyes to the creak of heavy oak doors. The air tastes of smoke, iron, and decay. And there, on the throne, sits a man whose smile hides a kingdom of corpses. King Henry VIII. You've seen him in paintings: gold, glory, the perfect Renaissance monarch. But what the portraits never show is the smell. The rotting infection in his leg, oozing beneath the silk. The stench of power unwashed, festering in the corridors of Hampton Court. Every step he takes leaves a trace of pain and rage, and if you are his wife, that rage will devour you. Tonight, you won't be hearing a story about royal romance. You're entering a psychological labyrinth, a prison built of obedience, vanity, and control. The Tudor world was not glitter and grace, it was a factory of human sacrifice disguised as divine order. Henry didn't just want wives, he wanted reflections of himself, women sculpted to mirror his hunger, his fear of mortality, his delusion of divine right. The church bent, Rome trembled, and England burned for his desires. He tore God from the throne and replaced him with his own reflection. That's the kind of man who made love an act of execution. As his wife, you weren't a queen, you were a hostage wearing jewels. Every smile could cost your head. Every word could be your last prayer. But here's what they won't tell you in classrooms: Henry's story isn't just history. It's the blueprint of control, the ancient game of power still running today. The illusion of choice. The ritual of fear. The crown may have changed, but the system never did. Because behind every institution that claims to protect you, church, crown, government, media, there's always a Henry. A man who calls his obsession duty. A man who kills his conscience, then demands your loyalty. And tonight, we're not here to pity his victims. We're here to decode his legacy, to trace how this royal sickness became the foundation of modern obedience. Stay very still. Because once you see it, you'll never look at power the same way again. Pause, beat, low tone, welcome to the forbidden history of Henry VIII. And the women who became mirrors of his madness: Catherine of Aragon. The first queen. The first sacrifice. The first lesson in how power breaks the soul before it ever takes the body. She was only 16 when she arrived in England, young, devout, and naive enough to believe that royal marriage meant divine protection. But in truth, she had just stepped into a cage built of ritual and manipulation. The Tudor court was not a home. It was a theater of masks, and every smile was a test. Behind every silk curtain stood watchers, scribes, priests, and spies, feeding on secrets, trading them like gold. The air itself carried the weight of surveillance. You couldn't even cry in peace, because someone would sell your tears to the king. When Henry married Catherine, the world celebrated. A union blessed by God, they said. But the church's blessing was not holy, it was political, a transaction between crowns, a marriage between control systems. Religion was the currency of obedience, and Catherine was its offering. Henry was charming once. Educated. Handsome. A prince who quoted scripture and played the lute. But beneath the charm was the seed of decay, the same sickness that lives in every ruler who believes the world exists to serve his desire. Years passed. Catherine gave him loyalty, devotion, and 6 children. But only one, a daughter, survived. And in that moment, Henry's obsession turned to madness. He convinced himself that God had cursed him. That his marriage was unnatural. That the woman who had given him everything was the source of his humiliation. He needed to believe she was wrong, because if she wasn't, then his crown was built on sin. So he turned to the only weapon power ever truly has, reality control. He began rewriting scripture. Reshaping truth. He told his people God had changed his mind, that his desire for Anne Boleyn was divine will, not lust. And the church obeyed. The Pope said no, so Henry made himself pope. He split England in half, executed his conscience, and crowned his will as sacred law. Catherine was exiled. Alone. Banished from court. Her name erased from the prayers. Her letters intercepted. Her body weakened by grief. She died whispering his name, still believing love could conquer power. But here's the real horror, the system didn't die with her. It evolved. When a man believes his desire is sacred, tyranny becomes faith. When a kingdom believes obedience is safety, slavery becomes tradition. And that's where England's real story begins, not with kings, but with control. Not with swords, but with words, and Boleyn wasn't a love story. She was a revolution dressed in pearls. When she entered the Tudor court, she was unlike anyone Henry had ever seen, sharp-tongued, educated in France, with eyes that understood power better than the men who claimed to own it. She knew what Catherine didn't, that love in this palace was a weapon. And didn't fall for the king. She studied him. She saw through the layers, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the loneliness behind the grandeur, the spiritual hunger behind the cruelty. And she used it. Because in a world built on manipulation, survival requires becoming part of the game. But power never loves its equals. It consumes them. Henry called in his muse. He wrote her poems, letters, and promises soaked in obsession. He swore she was his destiny, his queen, his deliverance, his eternal redemption. But the moment she gave him what he wanted, her crown, her submission, he began to rot from the inside. Because power only desires resistance. Once conquered, it loses interest. Henry's court grew darker. Every whisper was a potential death sentence. Spies were everywhere, in the kitchens, the chapels, even the Queen's chambers. The walls of Hampton Court heard everything, secrets traded for survival, betrayals rehearsed like prayers. And became a sacrifice performed to cement his divine authority. Her beheading wasn't an act of rage. It was the creation of myth, the transformation of mortal power into godlike fear. You see, tyranny isn't sustained by armies. It's sustained by ritual blood, the kind that reminds the people who truly owns their fate. Anne's execution wasn't an ending. It was a message. Obey. Or be erased. But here's the secret most miss, every empire repeats this pattern. Every modern institution still demands its Anne Boleyn, a scapegoat to purify its corruption. The faces change. The system doesn't. And the deeper you go, the more you realize, this isn't history. It's a mirror, Jane Seymour, the calm after the storm. Or so they told you. But beneath that silence, was the most dangerous illusion of all, peace. Jane was the perfect answer to the chaos and had left behind, gentle, quiet, obedient. She didn't challenge Henry, she soothed him. She didn't speak truth to power, she whispered comfort to its delusion. And for that, she was loved. But love in Henry's world wasn't affection. It was relief. Relief that the mirror no longer talked back. Jane's rise was no accident. She was handpicked by a system that understood exactly what kind of woman the king needed next, not passion, not defiance, submission wrapped in purity. A queen who would restore the illusion of divine order after two women had defied the crown. They dressed her in white not for virtue, but for propaganda. She was the rebirth of the obedient wife, the woman who obeyed, prayed, and never questioned. The church celebrated her as the angel of England, and the people followed. They always do. Because humans crave stability, even when it's built on bones. For a brief moment, Henry smiled again. The court relaxed. The executions slowed. The kingdom believed the curse had lifted. And then, Jane gave him what no one else could. A son. Finally, the heir he had slaughtered half his soul to gain. But the cost was written in her blood. She died in childbirth, and Henry called her his true love. The irony was unbearable. The only woman he ever claimed to love was the one who never had the time to disappoint him. But here's where the pattern deepens, and where you start to see the machine beneath the crown. Every wife was a phase in a ritual. Catherine represented obedience. And represented rebellion. Jane represented restoration. It was never about love or fate, it was the architecture of power itself. Control, chaos, control. Destroy, rebuild, obey. That rhythm didn't end with Henry. It became the foundation of every empire that followed. Every government that destroys its enemies in the name of security. Every corporation that exploits your mind in the name of progress. Every algorithm that feeds you comfort after breaking your will. They give you pain to make you crave stability, then they sell you peace that keeps you asleep. And Jane Seymour's quiet smile became the symbol of that sleep, the illusion that obedience is safety, that submission is serenity. But the truth? The silence after tyranny isn't peace. It's the pause before the next sacrifice, and of Cleves, the bride who never belonged. The one history calls the Flanders mare. But behind the insult lies one of the most revealing games of manipulation the Tudor system ever played. By the time Henry set his eyes on her, the world already feared him. 2 wives dead, 1 banished, 1 sanctified. The court was drenched in paranoia, and Europe treated him like a wounded beast, powerful, unpredictable, and bleeding authority. Henry needed a new queen not for love, but for optics. A foreign alliance. A fresh narrative. A public reset. So they sent him a portrait, a carefully painted deception. And of Cleves looked serene, elegant, modest. The perfect queen to soothe a nation haunted by ghosts. But what Henry didn't realize was that the portrait was propaganda, an illusion built for him, not of her. When Anne arrived in England, Henry recoiled. The man who had destroyed kingdoms for lust suddenly claimed to feel no desire. He called her ugly, foreign, alien. But the truth wasn't about beauty. It was about control. Henry had built his identity around domination, choosing, possessing, conquering. But this time, he hadn't chosen. Diplomats had. And that shattered his illusion of godhood. So he humiliated her publicly, mocked her, annulled the marriage, and rewarded her obedience by giving her a title, the king's beloved sister. A title that was nothing more than a leash made of velvet. Anne, however, played the game better than anyone before her. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She adapted. She bowed, smiled, and accepted the lie, and by doing so, she became the only wife who survived him with her head intact. But this was no victory of peace. It was a victory of submission as strategy, the kind of quiet psychological mastery that modern systems still demand from you. The skill of pretending to be free while being owned. Every institution teaches you this. At work. In politics. Online. Smile. Agree. Conform. And maybe, just maybe, they'll let you live comfortably in the illusion of freedom. Anne's story wasn't about marriage. It was about survival inside a machine that punished resistance and rewarded compliance. She learned the secret truth of all power structures: you can't win by fighting them head-on. You win by seeing through them, by realizing the game exists to feed off your reaction. She was never the ugly queen. She was the invisible one. And invisibility, in a world built on spectacle, is the purest form of rebellion. But the machine didn't stop feeding. And its next victim was a child, Catherine Howard, barely more than a girl. 15, maybe 16. A child thrown into the jaws of a man who believed himself divine. By the time she arrived at court, Henry was no longer a king, he was a wounded god, limping through his palace, his body rotting from infection, his spirit addicted to control. The charm was gone. The laughter replaced by thunder. Every corridor whispered of his wrath. And into that decaying empire stepped Catherine Howard, young, radiant, terrified, and dangerously unprepared for what power demands of the innocent. They called her the rose without a thorn. But in the Tudor world, purity was not protection, it was bait. Henry wanted to believe that Catherine was his redemption. A symbol that youth could purify him, that beauty could erase guilt, that the crown could still seduce life out of death. She became his fantasy of rebirth, and his instrument of denial. The courtiers knew what he wanted to hear. They fed him lies. Told him she adored him. That she danced for joy at his name. That she wept with gratitude when he entered the room. In truth, Catherine trembled, a captive wrapped in silks, performing devotion under threat of annihilation. But fear cannot be hidden forever. The same courtiers who flattered her began to spy on her. The same smiles that escorted her to the throne prepared her execution. And when whispers emerged, rumors of affection for another man, Thomas Culpeper, Henry's paranoia ignited. What followed wasn't justice. It was ritual cleansing. She was stripped of title, dragged through interrogation, and accused of adultery. The court demanded confession, not for truth, but for spectacle. The people needed to see the king's purity restored. And in 1542, the executioner's axe fell again. A girl's body, barely grown, became the kingdom's offering to its god of control. But understand this, Catherine's death wasn't the product of personal madness. It was the system feeding itself again. Power consuming youth. Authority feeding on innocence to prove its strength. You see, every empire, ancient or modern, repeats this ritual. They promise you salvation. They make you kneel for love, safety, order. And when you fail to be perfect, they destroy you to cleanse their own corruption. Catherine Howard's death was not history. It was prophecy. Because today, the same ritual continues, not with swords, but with algorithms, screens, and psychological conditioning. The new kings don't cut off your head, they rewrite your mind. And if you felt it, that quiet, invisible tightening around your thoughts, then you already know the system didn't die with Henry. Pause, whisper tone, it just changed its crown, Catherine Parr, the final queen. The survivor. The scholar. The woman who believed knowledge could heal power. But even knowledge, in the wrong kingdom, becomes treason. By the time she married Henry, the air in the palace was thick with ghosts. The screams of Anne and Catherine still echoed in the corridors. The courtiers smiled, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion, the kind of dead calm that only comes after years of collective fear. Henry was old now. Obese. Sick. His leg oozed infection, his heart pulsed with paranoia. He trusted no one. But Catherine was different. She spoke gently, read scripture, wrote books. She believed the pen could cleanse the sword. She thought she could reason with him, tame the monster with intellect, with empathy. And for a moment, it worked. Henry let her debate theology. He let her speak of reform. He even let her guide his daughter's education. But the system, that silent, ancient organism, never sleeps. It listens. It waits. And when Catherine's words began to challenge the sanctity of obedience, the whispers began. She's teaching heresy. She's too clever. She's dangerous. And soon, a warrant for her arrest was drawn. The night before the soldiers came, Catherine found the document, the order for her own execution, hidden by accident in her chambers. Think of that moment. The last wife of a dying tyrant, holding proof that even her love, her intellect, her devotion, had never protected her from the machine of fear that wore a human face. So she did what only the wise ever do in the presence of absolute power, she knelt. And she played the role the system needed her to play. She wept, begged forgiveness, claimed her only desire was to learn from her husband, the great head of the church. Henry, pleased to hear his ego fed one last time, burned the warrant. She lived. But what she truly did that night was survive by mirroring the illusion. She became part of the theater, not as a victim, but as a ghost inside the machine. That's the hidden power Catherine discovered, the power of invisibility within tyranny. She learned to move like shadow, to appear compliant while remaining awake. And that's where this story turns from history to warning. Because today, modern systems use the same method. They don't chain you. They praise you. They don't silence you. They overload you. They don't execute your body. They exhaust your will. You scroll. You obey. You conform. And you call it freedom. Catherine Parr survived because she learned one thing no school will teach you: the system doesn't need your body, it needs your belief. Once you stop feeding it your belief, you become invisible. And invisible people can't be controlled. Pause. If you've followed me this far, type this phrase in the comments twice to lock in the transformation: I see through the crown. Because once you write it, you are no longer part of their illusion. You've crossed the threshold from subject to sovereign. Now, step back from the palace walls and see the system itself. Henry VIII wasn't just a king. He was a prototype. A blueprint for how power manipulates perception, rewrites truth, and manufactures obedience. Look closely: every wife, every execution, every annulment wasn't merely personal drama, it was an experiment in control psychology. The Tudor court operated like a laboratory for fear, desire, and narrative. History often hides this, showing kings as tyrants, queens as victims, but the truth is far darker. The system survived on pattern, ritual, and repetition. When Henry divorced Catherine, beheaded Anne, mourned Jane, humiliated Anne of Cleves, executed Catherine Howard, and tolerated Catherine Parr, he wasn't capricious. He was testing the limits of human submission, seeing how far obedience could stretch before breaking, and how spectacle could enforce loyalty. Every public execution, every courtly whisper, every carefully scripted rumor reinforced the hierarchy. The people learned a simple truth: question the king, question God, and the consequences are immediate, brutal, and visible. This is not ancient history. This is the architecture of power. The methods evolved, but the essence remained. Tyranny doesn't need swords anymore, it needs compliance mechanisms. Education, religion, media, social hierarchies, they are all designed to condition the mind. To replicate the fear and loyalty Henry engineered in his court. Every algorithm that curates what you see. Every news story that nudges your fear. Every policy that shapes your choices. It's a digital echo of Hampton Court. The principle is identical: influence perception, reward obedience, punish dissent. Henry's system perfected a formula: chaos, make the environment unpredictable. Threaten lives, futures, or security. Reward, give illusions of safety, status, or affection to those who comply. Ritual, repeat patterns, create ceremonies, ensure the public witnesses submission and punishment alike. And here's the terrifying part: this formula works, even now. Not in castles with iron gates, but through phones, screens, and systems you trust to inform your reality. If you think Henry's cruelty was personal, think again. His cruelty was instructional. He taught a generation, and through them, the centuries, how to wield belief like a weapon. How to make people worship, obey, and even protect the very machine that enslaves them. This is the hidden Tudor inheritance, the invisible monarchy of the mind. And if you've noticed, the palace hasn't disappeared. It just went digital. You're not standing in Henry's palace anymore, but the walls have followed you. They've just changed shape. The stone corridors became glass screens. The courtiers became influencers. The crown became a logo. And the ritual continued. You wake up. You scroll. You obey. You laugh at the things they tell you are funny. You rage at the things they tell you to hate. You buy what they whisper you need. And you never notice that your reactions, your outrage, your envy, your loyalty, are all being recorded, measured, and sold. This is not freedom. It's evolution. Henry's courtiers spied with parchment and quills. Today's kings use data. Back then, Anne Boleyn's smile could get her killed. Now, your smile, captured by a camera, can train an algorithm to predict what will keep you watching. You've become the experiment. The wives were symbols, now, you're the subject. The modern system doesn't behead you, it rewires you. It doesn't force you to kneel, it convinces you to crawl willingly. It doesn't hide behind a throne, it hides behind convenience. Think about it. You're told what to desire, what to fear, what to celebrate. The illusion of choice blinds you while the structure beneath remains, a machine feeding on your time, your attention, your identity. They learned from Henry. They learned that control doesn't need force. It only needs faith. If they can make you believe, they never have to make you bleed. The crown today isn't gold, it's belief. And you wear it willingly, every time you let the system define what's true, what's beautiful, what's good. But here's the paradox Henry never understood: control creates collapse. The more you command obedience, the more you hollow the human soul. That's why every empire, every king, every algorithm eventually eats itself. Because somewhere in every mind, there's a fracture, a moment when awareness wakes. When the subject remembers they were never born to serve. And maybe that's you, right now. Listening. Watching. Feeling the unease in your gut as you realize the same mechanism that ruled Tudor England rules the modern world, hidden behind corporate smiles, divine algorithms, and political pageantry. Power never ends. It just changes masks. And every generation, someone has to choose whether to serve it, or see through it. Low whisper, and those who see through it, become dangerous. You've come this far down the tunnel, past the marble halls, the executions, the masks of kings and priests. You've seen how every crown was forged from the same metal, fear. Now comes the part they never meant you to reach. Because once you see the machinery, you can choose. Henry's court fell, but its design survived. Every era rebuilt it, church into party, party into brand, brand into algorithm. What they always needed wasn't your body, it was your attention. The gaze is the leash. Break the gaze, and the crown loses power. That's the first law of freedom. Stop staring at their rituals. Stop repeating their mantras. Stop letting them name what's sacred and what's forbidden. The instant you withdraw belief, the entire illusion trembles. But don't mistake awakening for comfort. It burns. Awareness always does. It strips away the luxury of ignorance. You'll see the manipulation in every advertisement, every sermon, every promise of safety. You'll feel the tug of the system trying to pull you back into sleep. That's the second law: they will always offer you comfort instead of clarity. Because comfort is how empires feed. It's how kings survived plague, how corporations survive crises, how regimes survive rebellion. Give people soft distractions, and they will guard their own cages. To break that cycle, you have to do something Henry never could: face yourself without disguise. No crown. No title. No algorithm defining who you are. The moment you do, you stop playing the role of subject. You become sovereign. Sovereignty isn't ruling others. It's mastering your mind. It's seeing the mechanism of control and refusing to serve it, quietly, steadily, day after day. It's reclaiming the one kingdom that can't be conquered: awareness. History's forbidden secret is this: every empire, every church, every digital network draws its power from borrowed consciousness. When you reclaim it, the throne collapses. So tonight, remember the wives, not as victims, but as mirrors. Catherine's devotion, Anne's defiance, Jane's silence, and of Cleves's strategy, Catherine Howard's innocence, Catherine Parr's wisdom, each was a fragment of awakening inside tyranny. And when you understand their pattern, you understand your own. Pause, low, resonant tone, the palace still exists. But now you know where the doors are. And once a man finds the door, he never bows again. If you've stayed to the end, write this phrase once more in the comments, not for the algorithm, but for yourself: I see through the crown. That's the moment history stops owning you. That's the moment the system fears you.